Hey, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic, funny, and love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. The Fateful Kiss. Sarah sat curled up on the sofa in her small apartment, clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The wall clock showed 10 p.m., but the thumping EDM music from the neighboring apartment still pulsed through the thin walls as if determined to shred the peace she'd worked so hard to find. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, but the heavy bass pounded in her ears like a hammer. The deadline for her new novel draft loomed close, yet she hadn't managed to write a single complete sentence all day. This wasn't the first time her thoughtless neighbor had disrupted her life. She'd sent reminders through the building's group chat and knocked politely on his door twice before, but nothing changed. Tonight, she decided enough was enough. Sarah set the mug on the table, stood up, slipped on her worn-out slippers, and glanced at herself in the mirror near the door. Messy hair, dark circles under her eyes, oversized t-shirt. She looked like a zombie freshly escaped from deadline hell. "It's fine," she muttered. "I don't need to look pretty to teach a lesson to some inconsiderate jerk." With burning resolve, she opened her door, stepped into the dimly lit hallway, and marched straight to the door of apartment 4B, the source of all her nightmares. She banged on the door 3 times, hard enough to sting her hand. No response. The music droned on, now switching to a shrill remix with a DJ's screams mixed into the relentless bass. Sarah gritted her teeth and pounded again, this time with her fist. "Hey, open the door right now!" she yelled, but her voice was completely drowned out by the noise from within. Frustrated, she placed her hand on the doorknob, intending to knock again, when she realized it wasn't locked. The door creaked open slightly under her touch. Sarah hesitated for a second, but her anger overpowered her reason. "Fine. If you won't come out, I'll come in," she mumbled, pushing the door open and stepping inside. It was pitch black inside. The lights were off with only faint streetlight glow streaming through the window, casting dim streaks across a cluttered floor. The music blared on, but there was no sign of anyone. Sarah frowned, took another step, and tried to adjust her eyes to the darkness. "Hey, whoever's here, turn off that damn music!" she snapped, her voice cracking in the unfamiliar space. Her foot suddenly tripped over something. A stray pair of sneakers scattered on the floor. She stumbled, flailing for support, but instead of hitting the wall, her hands slammed into a solid chest. "Who's there?" A deep male voice rang out, as startled as she was. Before Sarah could react, they both toppled over, crashing onto a nearby sofa. In the chaotic moment, her head knocked against his chin, and her lips, entirely unintentionally, met another pair. Time seemed to freeze for an instant. Those lips were soft, warm, carrying a hint of mint from chewing gum. Sarah froze, her mind blank, until reality hit her like a punch. She'd just kissed a stranger in the dark. She bolted upright, letting out a garbled scream, hands flailing to break free. The man scrambled up too, reaching to flip on a light switch near the sofa. White light flooded the room, revealing a scene that made Sarah want to sink into the floor. Standing before her was a tall guy with tousled brown hair, wearing a fitted black t-shirt that showed off toned muscles. His face was unreasonably handsome, sharp features, deep blue eyes, but right now he looked as bewildered as she felt. Who are you?" he stammered, one hand rubbing his chin, the other pointing at her like she was an alien who just landed. Sarah didn't answer. She stood rooted to the spot, face burning red, heart pounding like it might leap out of her chest. What had just happened? She'd come here to chew out her neighbor, not kiss him. I, she stuttered, then fell silent. Those blue eyes stared at her, and his confusion only amplified her panic. Unable to bear the stifling tension, Sarah spun around and bolted out the door like a gust of wind, leaving the man still sitting on the sofa, dumbfounded. She raced back to her apartment, slammed the door shut, leaned against the wall, and slid to the floor. Her hands covered her face, her breathing ragged. "What the hell did I just do?" she muttered, trying to shake off the searing sensation on her lips, the lingering trace of that unexpected kiss. In her ears, the EDM music still pulsed from the apartment next door, But now it wasn't just an annoyance. It was a reminder of the insane moment that had just unfolded, making her heart race for a reason she didn't dare acknowledge. In apartment 4B, Ryan, the man Sarah had just kissed, remained on the sofa, rubbing his lips, blinking as if he couldn't believe what had happened. "Who was that girl?" he mumbled, then chuckled to himself. The music played on, but for the first time in his life, he barely noticed it. All he could think about was the image of a girl with messy hair, an oversized t-shirt, and soft lips that had accidentally set his heart beating to a strange new rhythm. Sarah sat at the small desk in her new apartment, fingers tapping idly on her laptop keyboard, but her eyes were glued to the bold 0 in the corner of the screen, the number of words she'd written today. She sighed, pushed her chair back, and looked around the tiny room she'd hoped would mark a fresh start. Plain white walls, an old sofa she'd bought secondhand, a bookshelf stuffed with romance novels, all part of her effort to craft a peaceful space after months of chaos. But now she realized she'd been naive to think a pricey downtown apartment could deliver the quiet she craved. Sarah, 28, was a freelance writer scraping by on short story commissions and manuscript edits for other authors. She cherished silence, mornings by the window with a hot coffee, letting her imagination run free. But her life had been upended since her breakup with Jake, her ex-boyfriend, a textbook trap boy she now wanted to erase from her memory. Jake was the kind of guy who showed up with a charming smile, threw loud parties until dawn, and ultimately cheated on her with a model at the very birthday party he'd thrown for her. When she found out, Sarah cried for a week straight, then swore to herself she'd never let a guy like that into her life again. Moving to this new apartment was a big decision for Sarah. She chose it for its reasonable rent and proximity to her favorite coffee shop, where she often wrote. But within the first week, her dream of a peaceful life evaporated. The neighbor in apartment 4B, some guy she'd never met, seemed intent on turning his place into a nightclub every weekend. EDM beats, laughter, and the occasional sound of breaking glass drove her up the wall. She'd messaged the building's group chat and even knocked on his door a few times to complain. But he either ignored her or brushed it off with a laugh and a promise to turn it down, a promise he never kept. It all came to a head last night when she decided to confront him herself, and then that unexpected kiss happened. Sarah buried her face in her hands, trying to banish the memory of soft lips and bewildered blue eyes in that dark apartment. She told herself it was just an accident, a crazy moment not worth dwelling on. But every time she closed her eyes, her face flushed, her heart beating faster than usual. "No way," she muttered, standing up and opening the window for fresh air. "I can't let another trap boy mess with my head." From now on, she resolved to steer clear of apartment 4B, avoid that noisy neighbor, and focus on her work. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be as simple as she hoped. Meanwhile, in apartment 4B, Ryan sat on the sofa, where he and Sarah had crashed the night before, holding a beer, staring into space. He'd just gotten back from a long day at the office, but his mind had no room for numbers or business strategies. All he could think about was the strange girl who'd barged into his home, kissed him in the dark, and then fled like he was a monster. He laughed out loud, shaking his head, wondering if he'd dreamed it all. Ryan, 30, was the CEO of a rising tech startup. Tall and handsome with naturally tousled brown hair and striking blue eyes, he always wore fitted clothes that showed off his athletic build. He was the kind of guy women turned to look at when he entered a room, and he knew it. Ryan's life was a blur of busy days at the office and late-night parties with friends. He liked casual flings, no-strings-attached fun, and had never considered getting serious with anyone. To him, love was a luxury he didn't have time, or rather didn't want, to afford. Ryan's apartment was a perfect mess. Pricey, modern furniture mixed with empty beer cans, scattered sneakers, and a massive speaker system taking up half the living room. He threw parties not to show off, but because he loved being surrounded by laughter and music. He didn't pay much attention to neighbors' complaints. To him, they just needed to loosen up a bit, and everything would be fine. But last night, everything changed. Ryan didn't know who that girl was. He'd only glimpsed her in the hallway a few times, a girl with messy hair, oversized t-shirts, always looking down like she wanted to avoid eye contact. He'd never paid her any mind until she stormed into his place, fell on top of him, and left an indelible mark on his lips. Ryan set his beer down, rubbed his lips reflexively, and smiled to himself. "She's got guts," he muttered, "barged in here like a tornado, then ran off faster than a rabbit." He stood up, stepped onto his balcony, and looked toward the window of the apartment next door, where she lived. Through the frosted glass, he saw a small figure sitting at a desk, typing on a laptop. The warm yellow light spilling from her room stood in stark contrast to his loud, brightly lit space. Ryan frowned, wondering who she was, why she'd entered his life in such a bizarre way. For the first time in years, he felt an irresistible curiosity. Not because of beauty or charm, but because of a fleeting moment that had made his heart skip a strange beat. That night, Ryan didn't play music like usual. He sprawled on the sofa, eyes closed, trying to recall the softness of her lips and the panicked sound of her voice. Meanwhile, just one wall away, Sarah couldn't sleep either. She sat by her window, gazing at the hazy streetlights, telling herself she wouldn't let that neighbor upend her life. But neither of them knew that. From that fateful moment, destiny had tied them to a journey they couldn't escape. Chapter 2. Ryan becomes obsessed with the kiss. Ryan sat in the company's meeting room, a modern glass-walled space with a sweeping view of the city below. In front of him was a large screen displaying last quarter's revenue charts, and beside him stood his assistant, Mia, rattling off details about a new advertising strategy. Normally, Ryan would be the one steering the meeting, tossing out bold ideas, or at least feigning interest. But today he sat silent, twirling a pen absent-mindedly, his gaze drifting out the window. His mind wasn't on numbers or business plans. It was fixated on an image, a girl with messy hair, an oversized t-shirt, and soft lips that had accidentally brushed against his in the dark. 3 days had passed since that bizarre night, but Ryan couldn't shake it from his thoughts. He'd kissed plenty of people before, hot girls at parties, fleeting flings after a few drinks, and they'd all been quick, forgettable moments. But this kiss with the stranger was different. It wasn't intentional, no seduction or deliberate passion involved, just a pure accident, a chaotic, unexpected collision tinged with panic on both sides. So why couldn't he stop thinking about it? Maybe it was the surprising softness or the way she'd screamed and bolted, leaving him dazed on the sofa with his heart beating faster than usual. "Ryan, are you even listening?" Mia's voice cut through his thoughts, tinged with irritation. Ryan flinched, turning to his assistant with a forced smile. "Yeah, sorry, I zoned out. What did you say?" Mia sighed and repeated her spiel, but Ryan only nodded half-heartedly. He couldn't focus. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Not her face clearly, just a hazy figure with tangled hair and wide, startled eyes under the light. He wondered if he was losing it. Him, Ryan Carter, the handsome CEO who'd never let a girl occupy his mind for more than 5 minutes, now obsessed with a random kiss from a stranger. That night back at his apartment, Ryan sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through his phone contacts but unsure who to call. He played a soft track, rare for a guy who thrived on EDM, and closed his eyes, trying to relive that moment. He remembered how she'd crashed into him, her hands clutching his shirt by accident, her ragged breath as their lips met. It lasted mere seconds, but it was enough to send a jolt through him. Ryan laughed out loud, muttering to himself, "I've gone nuts. How's an accidental kiss messing me up like this?" But he couldn't stop. His curiosity about her grew, a smoldering fire in his chest. The next morning, as he grabbed coffee from the machine in the building's lobby, Ryan decided to act. He approached the old security guard, a short, kindly man always wearing a baseball cap and a gentle smile. "Hey, sir," Ryan started, keeping his tone casual. "Do you know the girl in apartment 4A? The one next to mine?" The guard frowned, then nodded. "Oh, Sarah. Yeah, she moved in last month. A writer, I think. Doesn't talk much, always lugging around a laptop." Sarah. Her name was Sarah. Ryan repeated it in his head, finding it as soft as her kiss. "Does she live alone?" he pressed, trying to hide his eagerness. The guard nodded. "Yeah, seems like it. She's quiet, not like those party types." Ryan smirked, catching the subtle jab at himself. but he didn't mind. He thanked the guard and walked off, a strange relief settling in now that he had a piece of the puzzle about the mystery girl. From then on, Ryan started paying attention to her. He'd stand on his balcony, pretending to admire the view but really peering at Sarah's window. Through the frosted glass, he'd see her at her desk, typing on her laptop, a steaming mug of coffee beside her. Once, she stood to stretch, revealing a slender frame hidden beneath her oversized t-shirt. Ryan wondered what she was writing, what her life was like, and why she'd stormed into his place like a hurricane only to vanish right after. He didn't understand the odd feeling stirring in him, a pull unlike anything he'd felt before. It wasn't mere desire, but a longing to see her again, to hear her speak, even just one sentence. Meanwhile, in the apartment next door, Sarah was trying her hardest to forget that night. She sat at her laptop, attempting to pick up the romantic novel draft she'd neglected for a week. But every time her fingers hit the keys, they trembled, and the memory of that unexpected kiss flooded back. She told herself it was just a dumb accident. She'd tripped, their lips had brushed. That was it. Nothing worth dwelling on. Yet whenever she heard music from Ryan's place, now quieter than before, her face flushed, and those lips flashed vividly in her mind. Sarah hated this. She hated losing control of her thoughts, hated how a noisy neighbor could rattle her so much. She knew who he was, the typical trap boy, a carbon copy of Jake, with a reckless lifestyle and endless parties. She'd seen him in the hallway a few times, always in tight t-shirts, stylishly messy hair, and a cocky smile like he owned the world. She reminded herself he wasn't trustworthy, just another version of the pain she'd endured. But why couldn't she forget the bewildered look in his eyes when the lights came on, or the warmth of his lips? One evening, when music drifted from Ryan's place again, this time a rare, gentle ballad, Sarah couldn't resist stepping onto her balcony. She stood there peering at his apartment and saw his tall figure sitting quietly on the sofa, beer in hand. For a moment, she felt a flicker of something, not because he was handsome or charming, but because of the unexpected stillness in him, so unlike the image she'd built. But she quickly shook her head, turned back inside, and slammed the window shut. "No way," she muttered. "I can't let this keep happening." Neither Sarah nor Ryan realized that while she fought to forget, he was growing more drawn to her. That kiss, though an accident, had planted a seed in their hearts, one neither was ready to face, but one they couldn't stop from sprouting. Chapter 3. Ryan pursues, Sarah keeps her distance. Ryan stood in his apartment, facing the crooked mirror in the corner of his living room, holding a vibrant bouquet of red roses he'd carefully picked out from the florist down the street. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, something he rarely touched outside of important meetings, and ran a bit of gel through his hair to look neater. Normally, he was the trap boy in tight t-shirts and stylishly messy hair, but tonight, he wanted to impress. He studied himself in the mirror, muttering, "All right, Ryan, you've got this. Just going over to borrow some salt, no big deal." But he knew he was lying to himself. This wasn't about salt. It was an excuse to see Sarah, to catch another glimpse of her face, and if he was lucky, to hear her say something besides the panicked scream from last time. He stepped into the hallway, clutching the bouquet tightly, his palms slightly sweaty with nerves, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his first pitch to the board of directors. Standing before apartment 4A, he took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent of roses mixed with the faint, musty wood smell of the old building. He knocked 3 times gently and waited. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time, accidentally rattling the doorframe. Still silence. Ryan frowned, wondering if she was home, but then he heard soft footsteps from inside. Slow, hesitant, as if someone was debating whether to respond. The door cracked open a sliver, and there was Sarah. She wore an oversized gray hoodie, her hair tied up in a high ponytail with a black scrunchie, a few strands falling loosely across her forehead. Her brown eyes regarded him warily, as if he were an intruder trespassing on her turf. Hi," Ryan said, his voice faltering from nerves. He held up the bouquet like a shield, but his hand trembled slightly, and 3 rose petals fluttered to the floor, leaving red streaks on the gray tiles. Sarah glanced down at the fallen petals, then back up at him, her expression blank. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone as cold as a winter breeze. Ryan forced a grin, trying to regain his composure. Hey, I'm Ryan, from 4B. I... I came to borrow some salt. I ran out and I'm cooking. He realized how ridiculous his excuse sounded the moment it left his mouth. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her lips pressing into a thin line as if suppressing a sarcastic remark. You're cooking at 8 p.m. without salt? She replied, her voice laced with mockery and suspicion. Ryan scratched his head, so flustered he wanted to disappear. Well, I'm new to cooking. Could you lend me some? Just a little. He gestured with his hand, flashing what he hoped was a charming smile. Sarah scanned him from head to toe. The slightly wrinkled shirt, the bouquet now missing half its petals, the awkward grin barely masking his clumsiness. In her mind, Jake's image flashed vividly, a smooth-talking guy who used sweet gestures to hide his cheating ways. To her, Ryan was no different, just another handsome, scheming type, utterly untrustworthy. I don't have any salt, she lied, her voice firm, then slammed the door shut in his face. The loud click hit Ryan's pride like a punch. He stood there, still holding the tattered bouquet, mouth agape. This is tougher than negotiating with investors, he muttered. But instead of giving up, a spark of determination flickered in his eyes. If she wouldn't open up over salt, he'd find another way. A few days later, Ryan discovered Sarah frequented a small coffee shop 2 blocks from their building, a quiet place with rough brick walls, worn wooden tables, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee lingering in the air. It was a world apart from his loud, flashy lifestyle. But he didn't care. He wanted to see her, and this was the perfect chance. On Saturday morning, he wore a fitted black t-shirt and a gray baseball cap, strolling into the shop with feigned confidence. He picked a table in a shadowy corner, ordered a glass of water, the cheapest thing on the menu, and pretended to read an old newspaper left on the table, though his eyes stayed glued to the entrance. When Sarah walked in, clutching her scratched-up laptop and settling at a table by the window, Ryan's heart pounded like a drum. She wore a thin beige sweater, her hair loose and natural, a few strands framing one side of her face. She set her laptop down, ordered a latte, and started typing, oblivious to her surroundings. Ryan took a breath, psyching himself up. Stay cool, you've got this. He stood, holding his glass of water, and deliberately walked past her table with slow steps. As he neared, he faked a stumble into a chair leg, spilling half the water across her table. A move he'd rehearsed in front of his mirror a dozen times the night before. Oh no, I'm so sorry, Ryan exclaimed, his voice dripping with mock panic, though inside he was thrilled. Sarah jumped, yanking her laptop away from the puddle, her glare hot enough to burn. What are you doing? She snapped, grabbing napkins from the table to wipe it up. Ryan darted to the next table for more napkins, helping her clean while apologizing profusely. I didn't mean to, honest. Let me buy you a coffee to make up for it. Or anything you want. He plopped into the chair across from her, ignoring the fury in her eyes. Sarah paused her wiping, staring at him. She recognized him instantly, the noisy neighbor, the guy who'd shown up at her door with a pathetic bouquet. No thanks, she said, her voice hard as stone. I can handle it. But Ryan wouldn't back down. He propped his chin on his hand, flashing what he thought was his most charming smile. I'm Ryan from 4B. We've met before, right? At, my place? Sarah's lips tightened, the memory of that kiss in the dark rushing back, heating her face. I know who you are, she replied icily. And I don't care. Ryan laughed loudly, unfazed by her attitude. You're Sarah, right? The security guard said you're a writer. What do you write? Love stories? He tilted his head, trying to spark a conversation. Sarah clenched her teeth, gripping her latte so hard she nearly crushed it. None of your business, she shot back, then stood, gathering her laptop and bag, and stormed out without a backward glance. Ryan watched her disappear through the glass door, a mix of disappointment and excitement swirling in him. The colder she got, the more he wanted to win her over. She's a tough one, he muttered, but the grin on his face didn't fade. One night, Ryan decided to pull out his final trick to impress Sarah. He dug an old guitar from the corner of his room, a relic from college when he'd learned a few chords to charm classmates, then abandoned for lack of patience. He dusted it off, tuned it clumsily, and stepped onto his balcony. He knew Sarah often wrote by her window at night, and he hoped music might reach her. He picked Can't Help Falling in Love, a simple romantic ballad he thought might soften her. But his rusty skills produced off-key twangs, the strings buzzing, and halfway through the chorus, one snapped with a loud twang, nearly making him drop the guitar in shock. Ryan flushed, cursing himself under his breath, but soldiered on with his raspy voice. Take my hand. Take my whole life, too. He glanced at Sarah's window, seeing the curtains twitch, and then she appeared on her balcony, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Ryan waved eagerly, grinning like an idiot. That was for you, he shouted, his voice cracking in the wind. Sarah stood still, her heart unexpectedly racing at the last line. It reminded her of nights when Jake played guitar for her, spinning sweet promises that turned out to be lies. To her, Ryan was no different, just another trap boy using tricks to lure her in. She shook her head, turned back inside, and slammed her window shut, leaving Ryan stranded on his balcony with a broken guitar and a sinking heart. Sarah couldn't deny Ryan had a certain pull. His goofy smile when he dropped those pedals, his endearing clumsiness spilling water at the cafe, even the earnest look in his eyes as he sang off-key on the balcony. They all tugged at her. There were moments she nearly smiled at his silly antics, like when he stood at her door with that wilted bouquet or staged that obvious stumble. But each time, Jake's memory stabbed her like a thorn in her heart. Jake had been charming too, using similar ploys to win her trust, only to betray her with a model at his own party. She told herself, I can't fall into this trap again. Ryan might be flashy and persistent, but she didn't believe he was sincere. To her, he was just another trap boy, someone who toyed with emotions and walked away when bored. She resolved to keep her distance, acting indifferent whenever he appeared. Yet deep down, she couldn't ignore how her heart beat faster each time he knocked, each time she spotted him at the cafe, or heard that off-tuned guitar from his balcony. She hated that feeling, hated her lack of control, and hated how Ryan never seemed to give up. One night, as Sarah sat writing at her desk, she heard a gentle knock. She got up, opened the door, and saw Ryan standing there, holding a tiny misshapen cupcake he'd made himself. The frosting was a mess, with a scrawled, "Sorry for the noise" in white. He smiled and said, I'm not great at baking, but I wanted to make amends. I'll cut back on the parties, I promise. Sarah stared at the cupcake, then into his blue eyes, her heart pounding like it might burst. She wanted to take it, to say something kind, to believe he wasn't like Jake, but fear surged up, stronger than ever. I don't eat sweets, she lied, her voice trembling, then shut the door, leaving Ryan outside with the cupcake in hand. Sarah sank onto her sofa, hands covering her face, her eyes stinging. She trembled, not from cold, but from the battle inside her. She was drawn to Ryan's enthusiasm, to the sincerity in his eyes that didn't seem fake, but the fear of being hurt, of repeating her mistake with Jake, built a wall she wasn't sure she could climb. On the other side, Ryan set the cupcake down in front of her door, sighed, but a glimmer of hope lingered in his gaze. He muttered, You're a tough one, Sarah, but I'm not giving up yet. Chapter 4. Misunderstanding and Ryan's Pain. Sarah sat at her desk, the warm golden light of her table lamp illuminating an old newspaper she'd absent-mindedly picked up in the building's lobby that morning. She wasn't one for newspapers. Thick novels were more her speed, but the bold headline on the front page had caught her eye. Ryan Carter, young CEO of Teknova, once again draws attention with lavish lifestyle. She frowned. The name Ryan Carter sounded familiar, but she didn't think much of it until she skimmed the article. The opening described him as a successful, wealthy man with irresistibly handsome looks and an unmatched reputation as a playboy. There was even a photo of Ryan in a sharp black suit, flashing a confident smile next to a luxury car, captioned, Carter is frequently spotted with beauties at extravagant parties. Sarah felt her heart tighten. Ryan Carter, the noisy neighbor from 4B. The guy who'd knocked on her door with a wilted bouquet, spilled water on her table at the cafe, and strummed an off-key guitar on his balcony. She set the paper down, her hands trembling slightly as she pieced it together. So he wasn't just some ordinary trap boy. He was a CEO, a man with money, power, and apparently a long list of women around him. She muttered, "I'm such an idiot. He's no different from Jake." Before she could collect her thoughts, she heard lively chatter from the hallway. Curious, she stepped onto her balcony and peeked through the thin curtains down to the building's entrance. A sleek black car was parked out front, and Ryan stepped out of the driver's seat, looking relaxed in a gray t-shirt and jeans. But what stopped her cold was the person emerging from the passenger side. A tall, stunning woman with endless legs and golden hair shimmering under the streetlights. She beamed at Ryan, resting a hand on his shoulder with easy familiarity, and they walked into the building together, chatting about something Sarah couldn't make out. Sarah turned back inside, slamming the balcony door shut, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and disappointment she couldn't name. She recalled what the gossipy neighbor, Linda, had said that afternoon when she'd gone to check her mail. "I saw that Ryan boy out to dinner with a gorgeous model, legs up to her armpits. Such a player. No wonder he's always partying." Sarah had brushed it off with a forced smile, thinking Linda loved to exaggerate, but now the scene before her confirmed it all. Ryan hadn't changed. He was still a trap boy, a guy who toyed with women, and she'd been foolish to let her feelings waver over his cheap tricks. She flopped onto the sofa, clutching a pillow to her chest, berating herself endlessly. "I knew it," she muttered. "He's just like Jake, sweet on the outside, a womanizer underneath." She remembered how her heart raced at Ryan's smiles, the moments she'd nearly softened to his enthusiasm. Now it all just made her feel stupid and hurt. She stood, opened her laptop, and resolved to banish any lingering thoughts of him. From now on, Ryan Carter wouldn't set foot in her life, not even in her mind. Meanwhile, Ryan had no idea his life had just been horribly misunderstood. The blonde Sarah saw was Chloe, a business partner at Technova. They'd just finished a dinner meeting with a client to discuss a new contract, and Chloe had only asked for a ride home because her car had broken down. To Ryan, it was a typical workday, but he never imagined that moment would send all his efforts with Sarah crashing into an abyss. The next morning, Ryan stood outside apartment 4A, knocking lightly, full of hope. He'd spent the previous night brainstorming ways to approach Sarah after his string of failures. Dressed in a white t-shirt, he held a small box of donuts, not homemade this time, since he knew how clumsy he was, and smiled confidently. "Sarah, you home? I brought donuts. Not too sweet, I promise," he called out, but there was no reply. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. He frowned, wondering if she was out, but then he heard faint footsteps inside, slow, hesitant. The door cracked open a sliver, and Sarah appeared, her eyes icy. "I don't need donuts," she said, her voice firm, then shut the door before Ryan could respond. He stood there, still holding the box, feeling like he'd been doused with cold water. "Wait, Sarah," he called, knocking a few more times. "I just want to talk, honest." But there was no answer, just a heavy silence from the other side. Ryan trudged back to his apartment, set the donuts on the kitchen counter, and sank onto the sofa. He rubbed his face, trying to figure out what had happened. Since the cupcake incident, Sarah had grown colder, but today she wouldn't even look at him for more than 2 seconds. He began to realize she was avoiding him entirely, not just in her demeanor, but in how she no longer showed up at the cafe or opened her balcony window like before. He muttered, "What did I do wrong?" The next day he tried again. He stood on his balcony, peering at her window, but the curtains were drawn tight, no sign of life. He called the building's security guard, asking if Sarah had left town, but the old man just chuckled. "She's still there, just doesn't like going out much." A wave of helplessness surged through Ryan. He was used to things coming easily, work, friends, women. But with Sarah, he felt like a bumbling fool learning to walk for the first time. That night, Ryan sprawled on his sofa, holding a beer but not drinking. He closed his eyes, replaying his attempts with Sarah, the bouquet shedding petals, the water spill at the cafe, the off-key guitar. He'd thought it was all a fun game, an exciting challenge to win over the prickly girl next door. But now, with her shutting him out completely, he felt an emptiness that wasn't just the sting of a playboy's failure. It was real pain. For the first time, rejection hurt him, and it left him rattled. He stood, stepped onto his balcony, and gazed at Sarah's dark window. Does she really hate me? He wondered. He thought back to that accidental kiss in the dark, the way she'd screamed and fled, and the flicker in her eyes when he'd brought the cupcake. He knew she wasn't entirely indifferent. He'd seen her pulse quicken in those brief moments their gazes met. So why was she pushing him away like this? Ryan questioned himself, and for the first time he realized he genuinely liked Sarah. Not as a fleeting fling like the others, but with a deeper, more honest feeling. He went back inside, sat at his table, and scribbled on a piece of paper. Sarah, I don't know what I did wrong, but I want to explain. Can you give me a chance? He folded it, planning to slip it under her door in the morning. But as he closed his eyes, sleep wouldn't come. The pain of rejection, of not being able to reach her, made him feel powerless for the first time. A sensation alien to someone who'd always controlled everything. Chapter 5. The Truth and the Confession. Ryan stood in his apartment, hands on his hips, staring at the tired face reflected in the bathroom mirror. It had been over a week since Sarah started avoiding him completely, and he couldn't stand the helplessness anymore. He'd tried everything: flowers, cupcakes, an off-key guitar, but she'd built a wall he couldn't break through. All right, he muttered, a spark of determination flashing in his eyes. If the soft approach doesn't work, I'll go big. A mischievous grin spread across his face as a wild idea popped into his head. He stepped into the shower, turned on the water, and lathered shampoo into his hair until it was a mass of white foam dripping down his shoulders. He slipped on a garish green swimsuit, bought for a beach trip he'd never taken, and spritzed himself with cologne to offset the absurdity. Looking in the mirror, he laughed, hair plastered with suds, shoulders soaked, a walking soapstorm disaster. Perfect, he said to himself, then bolted out of his apartment, racing to 4A with adrenaline pumping through him. Ryan pounded on Sarah's door relentlessly, his hands smacking so hard that foam splattered across the hallway. "Sarah, help me!" he yelled, his voice laced with fake panic. The door cracked open a sliver, and Sarah appeared in an oversized gray sweater, her eyes widening at the sight of him. "What the hell are you doing?" she snapped. But before she could say more, Ryan cut in. "My water cut out mid-shampoo. I can't see. The soap's stinging my eyes. Let me rinse off, please." He winked, putting on a pitiful face, but Sarah wasn't moved. She shot him a scorching glare and slammed the door shut. Click! The sound rang out, but Ryan was quick, jamming his right hand into the gap before it closed fully. A sharp pain shot from his fingers up his arm, and he yelped for real. "Ow! That hurts!" He dropped to his knees, clutching his hand, face scrunched in pain as soap dripped from his hair onto the floor. Sarah flung the door open again, alarmed to see him kneeling there, his hand red and swelling. "Are you insane? Why'd you stick your hand in there?" she shouted, her voice a mix of anger and worry. Ryan looked up, tears welling, partly from the soap, partly from genuine pain, and groaned, "Because you shut it so fast. Now my hand hurts like this. How am I supposed to finish washing my hair?" Sarah froze, staring at him with a mix of suspicion and confusion. She knew he was playing it up, but his red hand and pitiful state made it impossible to ignore him. "Get up," she sighed, opening the door wider. "Come in and rinse off, then get out." Ryan grinned despite the pain and shuffled into her apartment, leaving a trail of water on the floor. In Sarah's small bathroom, he stood at the sink, clumsily trying to rinse his hair with his left hand, splashing water all over the mirror. Sarah stood at the doorway, arms crossed, glaring. "If you can't do it, just stop. I'll do it," she grumbled, stepping in and pushing him onto a small stool by the sink. She turned on the faucet, washing the foam out of his hair with quick but gentle movements. Ryan sat still, feeling the warmth of her hands, and smiled faintly. "You're really good at this," he teased. Sarah glared at him through the mirror. "Shut up, or I'll dump a bucket of water on your face." When she finished, Ryan stood, hair wet but clean, flashing a grateful smile. "You really saved me," he said, holding up his right hand with a pained expression. But my hand still hurts a lot. Probably can't do much for days. Sarah frowned, knowing he was exaggerating, but she didn't argue. She just wanted him gone. But Ryan had other plans. Over the next few days, Ryan became an uninvited regular at 4A. He used his injured hand as an excuse for everything from cooking to opening beer cans. The first day he knocked, his right hand wrapped in a bandage, self-applied for extra drama, and said, "Sarah, I'm starving and my hand hurts. Can you cook me something?" Sarah sighed, but a tiny pang of guilt from the door incident made her relent. She whipped up a simple plate of spaghetti, setting it in front of him with a scowl. Ryan dug in, praising her nonstop. "This is better than a restaurant chef." Sarah huffed, turning away to hide a fleeting smile. By the third day, he showed up claiming, "I want a beer, but my hand hurts. Can you open it for me?" Sarah glared but grabbed the can, popped it open, and handed it to him with a sour look. Ryan grinned, took a sip, and said, "You're pretty cute, you know that?" Sarah blushed, spun around, and muttered, "Don't get your hopes up." By the end of the week, Ryan's hand was clearly fine. He ditched the bandage and was holding his phone with ease. But he kept shamelessly bothering her. He knocked, raising his right hand with a fake wince. "It's still a little sore. Can you make me some coffee?" Sarah stared, finally snapping, "You've been fine for ages. Stop pretending." Ryan burst out laughing, scratching his head. "Caught me, huh? But I like coming over. Don't you enjoy it?" Sarah shook her head, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward, a smile she couldn't quite suppress. Through these mooching visits, Sarah began to notice something different about Ryan. He was flashy, sure, but not like Jake. Jake always projected perfection, using sweet words to mask his philandering, while Ryan was clumsy and oddly genuine. He didn't mind looking foolish, standing in the hallway with a head full of suds or spilling coffee while trying to brew it, just to get her attention. He didn't hide his awkwardness, and that slowly chipped away at her defenses. One evening, as Sarah sat on her sofa reading, Ryan knocked. He walked in. No silly excuse this time, just holding a hot coffee he'd brewed himself, without spilling. He set it in front of her, sat across from her, and looked at her with a rare seriousness. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something for real." Sarah looked up, her heart racing at his expression. "I don't know what love is," Ryan began, his hands clenching, as if gathering courage. "I've lived 30 years, met tons of people, but I've never felt like this. Not until you walked into my place, well, barged in, really, and turned everything upside down. That kiss, even if it was an accident, made me unable to stop thinking about you. I'm not good with sappy stuff, but I know one thing for sure. I really like you." Sarah sat still, gazing into Ryan's blue eyes. She saw a rare sincerity there. Not the cocky glint of a playboy, but the honesty of someone opening up for the first time. Her fear of Jake, the dread of betrayal and pain, melted away as she realized Ryan wasn't him. Jake never admitted weakness, but here was Ryan, fumbling through a confession, unafraid to bear his awkwardness to her. "You don't have to answer now," Ryan continued, offering a shy smile. "I just wanted you to know, I'm not great at this love thing, but if you give me a chance, I'll learn." He stood to leave, but Sarah instinctively grabbed his hand. "Wait," she said, her voice shaky. Ryan turned back, surprised. Sarah took a deep breath, meeting his eyes. I'm drawn to you too," she admitted, her face flushing, "even though I've been trying to deny it all this time." Ryan froze, then broke into the brightest smile Sarah had ever seen. He sat back down, still holding her hand, and for the first time, they both felt the wall between them crumble. Chapter 6. The Ending. Sarah sat on the sofa in her apartment, cradling a mug of hot tea, her eyes fixed on Ryan as he stood at the kitchen counter with a rare look of concentration. He wore a simple black t-shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and was carefully chopping an onion, though his clumsy movements made her stifle a laugh. It had been a week since he confessed his feelings, and since then, things between them had started to shift. No more knocking on her door with ridiculous excuses. No more EDM blaring every night from apartment 4B. Instead, Ryan showed up with simple, sincere promises, and this time, she decided to give him and herself a chance. I promise I'll cut back on the parties, Ryan had said that night, sitting across from her on the sofa after his confession. He held her hand, his eyes serious. I'm not saying I'll quit entirely. I still like a bit of fun, but I won't let it bother you anymore. And he hesitated, offering a shy grin. I'll learn to cook, to make you happy. Sarah raised an eyebrow, barely hiding her skepticism. You? Cook? If you burn down the kitchen, don't blame me. Ryan laughed heartily, pulling her into a sudden hug. If it burns, I'll buy you a new apartment, he teased, his voice warm and playful. From that day, Ryan began keeping his word. He toned down the loud parties. Instead of hosting a crowd, he'd only invite a few close friends over for beers and football, keeping the noise low. He even dug out an old cookbook his mom had sent him, determined to master a few basic dishes to impress Sarah. Watching him change bit by bit, Sarah felt her heart, once frozen after Jake, slowly thaw. But there was still one nagging thorn in her chest she hadn't dared to face. One afternoon, as they sat on her balcony watching the sunset paint the city gold, Sarah took a deep breath and turned to him. Ryan, she said, her voice tentative, last week I saw you get out of your car with a gorgeous blonde. Who was she? Ryan looked up surprised, then burst out laughing as he realized what she meant. Jealous, huh? He teased, but seeing her serious expression, he quickly explained. That was Chloe, my business partner. We had a client dinner, and she needed a ride home because her car broke down. That's it, I swear. Sarah studied him, searching for any hint of a lie, but his blue eyes held only honesty. She gave a small smile, a wave of relief washing over her for the first time in days. All right, she said, resting her head on his shoulder. I trust you. Ryan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer, and in that moment, they both knew they'd stepped into something new. No more misunderstandings or distance, just trust and hope. That evening, they decided to cook dinner together in Sarah's apartment, an idea Ryan eagerly suggested to prove he was learning to cook, as promised. Sarah stood beside him in the tiny kitchen, watching as he awkwardly cracked 2 eggs into a bowl, bits of shell mixing with the whites. You sure you know how to make this? She asked, holding a wooden spoon, her eyes full of doubt. Ryan grinned confidently, setting a non-stick pan on the stove. Fried eggs? How hard can it be? Watch me. He poured oil into the pan, turned on the heat, and started stirring the eggs with a fork, the only utensil he could find in the drawer. Sarah crossed her arms, leaning against the counter, half worried, half amused, as he clumsily dumped the egg mixture into the hot pan. Careful, don't burn it, she warned, but Ryan just shrugged. Relax, I've got this. Less than a minute later, a scorched smell wafted from the pan. Ryan panicked, shaking the handle vigorously to salvage it, but the eggs turned into a blackened mess stuck to the bottom. Maybe the heat was a bit high, he said, scratching his head, his face flushed with embarrassment. Sarah couldn't hold back anymore, bursting into laughter that echoed through the small kitchen. I told you, you're a cooking disaster. Ryan looked at her, sheepish at first, but soon joined in her laughter. He set the pan aside, stepped over, and hugged her from behind, whispering, Well, I've got you here, so why do I need to be good at cooking? Sarah turned, swatting his chest lightly, but her eyes sparkled with joy. Next time, I'm cooking, and you're just watching, she teased. They scrapped the burnt eggs and started over together, this time a simple spaghetti with tomato sauce under Sarah's direction. Ryan stood by, dutifully chopping vegetables as she instructed, occasionally brushing her hand on purpose to tease her. When dinner was ready, they sat across from each other at the small table, the warm yellow light casting a glow on their faces. Ryan raised his glass of water, he'd skipped beer to honor his promise, and said, To us for not killing each other after that first kiss. Sarah laughed, clinking her glass with his. To you for surviving that door jam. Ryan set his glass down, beaming at her. I owe that door jam a thank you, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. It's what got you to give me a chance. I'd never been in that situation before. Rejected over and over. Flowers dropping petals, guitar strings snapping, even the cupcakes ignored. Good thing that door came through, or I'd still be out in the hall knocking. Sarah laughed, shaking her head at his shamelessness. but her gaze softened. "You're completely shameless," she said, though her tone held no trace of coldness anymore. They ate and chatted about little things, from the novel Sarah was writing to the time Ryan first played guitar and ruined a school performance. No tension, no misunderstandings, just a warm, comfortable closeness, as if they'd found a missing piece of each other's lives. After cleaning up, Ryan pulled Sarah to the sofa, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You know," he whispered, "I never thought I'd enjoy a quiet night like this." Sarah smiled, turning to look at him. "And I never thought I'd trust a guy like you." They fell silent, gazing at each other, and then Ryan leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Not sudden like the first time, but tender and full of feeling. 1 year later. A year had passed since the night Ryan burned the eggs in Sarah's tiny kitchen, and their lives had transformed in ways neither had expected. Apartments 4A and 4B were no longer opposing worlds. They'd become part of each other, filled with quiet evenings, laughter, and the occasional smell of burnt food whenever Ryan tried a new recipe. Sarah had finished the novel she'd been nurturing for months, a romantic comedy inspired by their fateful meeting. She'd titled it A Kiss in the Dark, and today, after a year, it officially hit the shelves. The book launch took place at a small bookstore downtown, the same spot where Sarah used to write while avoiding Ryan. The room was packed. Friends, colleagues, and curious readers intrigued by the quiet writer's story. Sarah stood amid the crowd, wearing an elegant light blue dress, holding a microphone with slightly trembling hands as she thanked everyone. "This book is a piece of my life," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd for Ryan. "It started with an accident, a kiss in the dark, and led me somewhere I never expected. Love." Ryan stood in the corner, leaning against a bookshelf, a proud smile on his face as he listened. He wore a white dress shirt, something he now wore often to keep up appearances, as Sarah teased, and kept his hands in his pockets, concealing a small box he'd carried all day. When the signing began, he quietly joined the line, pretending to be just another reader. Sarah looked up when it was his turn, smiling lightly. "What should I write for you, noisy neighbor?" she asked, teasing. Ryan didn't answer right away. He dropped to one knee, startling her in the crowd. Whispers erupted, a few people cheered, but for Sarah, the world went silent. Ryan opened the small box, revealing a simple silver ring with a tiny blue stone, the color of his eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice shaky but firm, "I'm not good with fancy words, but the past year has been the happiest of my life. From that accidental kiss, from that door jam you'll never let me forget, I learned what love is. Marry me?" Sarah stood frozen, eyes glistening, hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. She thought of him standing at her door with soap in his hair, the times he burned the kitchen, the nights they held each other on the sofa. She nodded, tears spilling, and said, "Yes, I will." Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger, stood, and pulled her into a tight embrace amid thunderous applause. He whispered in her ear, "Thank that door again. It's my real savior." Sarah laughed, swatting his chest, but her eyes shone with joy. The crowd cheered their happiness. Her book sold out. A week later, on a radiant spring morning, they held a small wedding in a park near their building. Just family and a few close friends. No loud parties like Ryan's old style. Sarah wore a simple white dress, her hair adorned with flowers, while Ryan, in a black suit, grinned ear to ear as he held her hand down a petal-strewn path. They exchanged vows under a sprawling tree, and when he kissed her, the applause rose softly like a gentle melody. That night, they returned to Sarah's apartment, now their shared home, and curled up on the sofa, holding each other as they had so many times before. Ryan ran his fingers through her hair, whispering, "From trap boy to your husband, I've come a long way." Sarah laughed, resting her head on his chest. "And from hating you to loving you, not bad either." Their laughter filled the air, blending with the simple happiness of a new beginning. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, Subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.